In this demo, I used generative AI to summarize information gathered using passive reconnaissance. All right, so imagine that I've done some passive reconnaissance using your typical open source intelligence tools like just searching the web, using a couple of different search engines, and so on. So we've returned this massive amount of reconnaissance information, and we want to use generative AI to summarize that information for us. Okay, well, I've done exactly that in a script named passive-recon.py. Let's explore passive-recon.py. So on lines 2 and 3, I import the modules that I need, OpenAI and the OS module. Then on line 6, I retrieve my OpenAI API key that I've configured in an environment variable named OpenAI_API_key. Starting on line 9 is the passive_recon_summary function definition. It's in this function where I make the call to the OpenAI.completion.create method. The passive recon summary function takes a single parameter, query, which represents the prompt passed to it in the call to the function later on in the Python script on line 32. We'll get to that in a moment. So on line 10, the OpenAI API call is made using, as mentioned, the OpenAI.completion.create method. This method creates a completion task, which generates text based on the provided parameters. On line 11, the engine parameter specifies the engine for the text generation. In this case, the engine is text-DaVinci 002. This engine is a variant of the GPT 3.5 model, and it's optimized for generating text. On line 12, the prompt parameter is where you provide the input text or prompt for the text generation. It's set to the value of the query string variable. On line 13, the max tokens parameter determines the maximum length of the generated text. In this case, it's set to 100 tokens. The end parameter specifies how many different completions to generate. Here it's set to 1, so only one response will be generated. On line 15, I set the stop parameter to none. And on line 16, the temperature parameter controls the randomness of the generated text. Recall that a higher value, like 0.8 or 0.9 for example, or 1, makes the output more random, while a lower value, for example 0.1, makes it more deterministic. Here it's set to 0.1, meaning the model's output will be more deterministic. And this simply means that it will closely follow what it perceives as the most probable next token based on the input. This often leads to more focused and coherent text, but may sacrifice some creativity in the process. Okay, then on line 18, after making the API call and receiving a response, this line extracts the generated text from the response object. The response.choices list contains the generated completions, and response.choices0.text gets the text of the first and only, in this case, choice. The extracted generated text is stripped of leading and trailing white space using the strip method. Then on line 19, it's returned as the output of the passive_recon_summary function. Now on line 22, I set up the name of the organization I've gathered the recon information about. Then on line 23, I set up the recon info F string with the information I've gathered using traditional passive recon. Okay, not a huge amount of information, but it's good information nevertheless. Next, on line 31, I create the recon_query F string, which is effectively the prompt used in the call to the GPT model. Then, as mentioned, on line 32, I make the call to the passive_recon_summary function. And the recon_query string is passed in as an argument. Then on line 33, I just print the summary. Okay, so let's run the code. So down in terminal, I'll type Python passive-recon.py, and I'm using tab to autocomplete, and I'll press enter. All right, so that created a summary of the information using the OpenAI API. It tells me all about Unito Games and that it's a Boston-based company who it was founded by, the number of employees it has, $30 million in revenue in 2023, its top products and services, and so on. Now, if I clear the screen and then up arrow to run the same command again, I should see pretty close to the same output. And it is very close to the same output. And the reason for that, again, is the temperature setting. I have it set to 0.1, so the model's output will be more deterministic. All right, and so with that, we've used generative AI to summarize information gathered using passive reconnaissance. In this demo, we use generative AI to analyze information gathered using active reconnaissance. Okay, to get started in my demo, I've opened my browser and I've navigated to nmap.org/book/man.html. This is the Nmap reference guide. One of the ways that we can start with active reconnaissance is by performing a host discovery using a tool like Nmap, for example. Nmap is a very common tool for just such endeavors. We can use it to quickly find hosts, find any open ports, and then we can focus in on those ports and the services running on those hosts. We can use generative AI to help us analyze all of the active reconnaissance information that we've gathered. So let's go down to the taskbar. I'll select the Visual Studio Code icon to bring up Visual Studio Code, where I have a Python script open named active-recon.py. This is a Python script that interacts with the OpenAI API to generate text using a GPT model. Let's examine this code. So lines 2 and 3 is where we import the modules we need. Then on line 6, I retrieve my OpenAI API key that I've configured in an environment variable named OpenAI_API_key. Then on line 9, this is the active recon analysis function definition. Notice that it takes a single parameter, query, which represents the prompt passed to it in the call to the function. And we'll see that later in the Python script on line 37. On line 10, the OpenAI API call is made using the OpenAI.completion.create method, which creates a completion task and generates text based on the provided parameters. And the parameters, they're set from lines 11 down through 16. In a previous demo titled Performing Passive Reconnaissance, I went through each parameter in detail. In this script, though, I want to focus on a couple of parameters. First, note on line 12, I've set the prompt to the query parameter. Then on line 16, I set the temperature parameter to 0.5. Now recall that the temperature parameter controls the randomness of the generated text. A higher value closer to 1 makes the output more random, while a lower value closer to 0 makes it more deterministic. Here, I've set it to 0.5, so it's somewhere in the middle. I want the GPT model to be somewhat focused, but I don't really want it to sacrifice much creativity. Okay, next, lines 18 and 19. This is where I configure my message and return it from the active recon analysis function. On line 22, I define a Python dictionary variable for my gathered intel from active reconnaissance. This kind of dictionary structure is commonly used for organizing various pieces of information, and this includes information about a target during cybersecurity reconnaissance. So I've included the website URL, the web technologies that I've noticed, open ports, and observed pages. On line 33, I engineer the prompt for this exercise, and notice that I specify to the GPT model that I want it to analyze the information and recommend any potential vulnerabilities. The nice thing about this is that if I want to change the prompt, if I want to engineer it differently, I just come here and I change my recon query. Okay, then on line 37, as mentioned, I make the call to the active recon analysis function, passing the recon_query argument. Then on line 38, I print the analysis. Okay, well, let's run this script. So down in terminal, I'll type Python active-recon.py using tab to autocomplete and press enter. And from the analysis, we're informed that the website is using outdated software versions which may contain known vulnerabilities, that the website is not using HTTPS, the website is using a number of open ports which may be exploited, and that it has a number of observed pages which may be targeted by attackers. Now I'll clear and then run the script again, and let's see if we get something a little bit different. And we do. It actually mentions the specific protocols and services that are running and that they may be exploited by an attacker. All right, well, with that, we've used generative AI to analyze information gathered using active reconnaissance.